The Day of the Triffids is a 1951 post-apocalyptic novel by the English science fiction author John Wyndham. After most people in the world are blinded by a meteor shower, an aggressive species of plant starts killing people. Although Wyndham had already published other novels using other pen name combinations drawn from his real name, this was the first novel published as John Wyndham. It established him as an important writer and remains his best-known novel. The story has been made into the 1962 feature film of the same name, 3 radio drama series, in 1957, 1968 and 2008, and 2 TV series, in 1981 and 2009. It was nominated for the International Fantasy Award in 1952, and in 2003 the novel was listed on the BBC's survey The Big Read. Summary. The protagonist is Bill Mason, a biologist who has made his living working with Triffids, tall, venomous carnivorous plants capable of locomotion and communication, whose extracts are superior to fish or vegetable oils. Due to his background, Mason suspects they were bioengineered in the USSR and accidentally released into the wild. The result is worldwide cultivation of Triffids. The narrative begins with Bill Mason in hospital, his eyes bandaged after having been splashed with Triffid poison. During his convalescence he is told of an unexpected green meteor shower. The next morning, he learns that the light from the unusual display has rendered any who watched it completely blind. Later in the book, Mason speculates that the meteor shower may have been orbiting satellite weapons, triggered accidentally. After unbandaging his eyes he wanders through an anarchic London full of blind inhabitants and later becomes enamored of wealthy novelist Josela Platon, forcibly used as a guide by a blind man. Intrigued by a single light on top of Senate House in an otherwise darkened city, Bill and Josela discover a group of sighted survivors led by a man named Beadley, who plans to establish a colony in the countryside, and decide to join the group. The polygamy implicit in Beadley's scheme appalls some group members, especially the religious Miss Durrant, but before this schism can be dealt with, a man called Wilfred Coker stages a fire at the university and kidnaps a number of sighted individuals, including Bill and Josela. They are each chained to a blind person and assigned to lead a squadron of the blind, collecting food and other supplies, while beset by escaped Triffids and rival scavengers. When Mason's followers are dying of an unknown disease he attempts to find Josela, but his only lead is an address left behind by Beadley's group. Joined by a repentant Coker, Mason drives to the address, a country estate called Teensham in Wiltshire, but finds neither Beadley nor Josela. After some days, Mason finds Josela at her friend's country home in Sussex, while Coker returns to Teensham and later rejoins Beadley. En route, Mason is joined by a young sighted girl named Susan. Along with other refugees, some of them blind, they attempt to establish a self-sufficient colony in Sussex, menaced chiefly by Triffids. Years pass until a helicopter pilot representative of Beadley's faction reports that his group has established a colony on the Isle of Wight. Mason and his followers are reluctant to leave their own colony but are provoked to do so by soldiers of a despotic new government. After feigning agreement with the latter's plans, the Masons disable the soldiers' vehicle and flee to the Isle of Wight, determined to one day destroy the Triffids and reclaim Earth. Publication history. In the United States, Doubleday and Company holds the 1951 copyright. A 1961 condensed version of the book also appeared in Collier's magazine. An unabridged paperback edition was published in the late 1960s, in arrangement with Doubleday, under the Crest Book imprint of Fawcett Publications World Library. Influences. Wyndham frequently acknowledged the influence of H. G. Wells' The War of the Worlds, 1897, on the Day of the Triffids. In regard to the Triffids' creation, some editions of the novel make brief mention of the theories of the Soviet agronomist and would-be biologist Trofim Lysenko, who eventually was thoroughly debunked. In the days when information was still exchanged, Russia had reported some successes. Later, however, a cleavage of methods and views had caused biology there, under a man called Lysenko, to take a different course. Chapter 2. Lysenkoism at the time of the novel's creation was still being defended by some prominent international Stalinists. Critical reception. Carl Edward Wagner cited The Day of the Triffids as one of the 13 best science fiction horror novels. Arthur C. Clarke called it an immortal story. In his book Billion Year Spree, The History of Science Fiction, Brian Aldiss coined the term cozy catastrophe to describe the subgenre of post-war apocalyptic fiction in which society is destroyed save for a handful of survivors, who are able to enjoy a relatively comfortable existence. He specifically singled out The Day of the Triffids as an example of this genre. Anthony Boucher and J. Francis McComas praised it, saying rarely have the details of collapse been treated with such detailed plausibility and human immediacy, and never has the collapse been attributed to such an unusual and terrifying source. Forrest J. Ackerman wrote in astounding science fiction that Triffids is extraordinarily well carried out, with the exception of a somewhat anticlimactic if perhaps inevitable conclusion. However, Groff Conklin, reviewing the novel's initial book publication, characterized it as a good run-of-the-mill affair and pleasant reading, provided you aren't out hunting science fiction masterpieces. Cultural impact. According to director Danny Boyle, the opening hospital sequence of The Day of the Triffids inspired Alex Garland to write the screenplay for 28 Days Later, 2002. The short story How to Make a Triffid by Kelly Lager includes discussions of the possible genetic pathways that could be manipulated to engineer the Triffids from Wyndham's story. Adaptations. Film adaptations. London-based film producers Albert R. Broccoli and Irving Allen purchased the film rights and in 1956 hired Jimmy Sangster to write the script. Sangster believed that Wyndham was one of the best science fiction novelists writing at the time and felt both honored and a little bit intimidated that he was about to start messing with Wyndham's novel. Sangster claims he was paid for his work but never heard from the producers, and the film was not made. He later said that he did not think his script was good. A British cinematic version, directed by Steve Sekeli and with a screenplay by Bernard Gordon, was filmed on location in Spain and released in July 1962. In September 2010, Variety announced that a 3D film version was being planned by producers Don Murphy and Michael Prager. The anime film Crayon Shin-chan, My Moving Story. Cactus Large Attack. 2015, had a similar setting with Triffids replaced by killer cacti. Game adaptations. Prashnynova Kola Lipnice, a non-profit organization that pioneered experiential education summer camps in Czechoslovakia during the 80s, developed an outdoor game based on the story. Print adaptations. Marvel Comics adapted the story in the magazine Unknown Worlds of Science Fiction, 1975. There were readings of the novel in 1953, BBC Home Service 15x 15 minutes, read by Frank Duncan. Giles Cooper adapted the novel in 6 30-minute episodes for the BBC Light programme, first broadcast between October 2 and November 6, 1957. It was produced by Peter Watts. A second version of Cooper's adaptation, for BBC Radio 4, was first broadcast between June 20 and July 25, 1968. It was produced by John Powell, with music by David Kane of the BBC Radiophonic Workshop. It was adapted in Germany in 1968 by Westdeutscher Rundfunk, WDR, Köln, Cologne, translated by Hein Brühl, and most recently rebroadcast as a 4-episode series on WDR5 in January 2008. It was adapted in Norway in 1969 by Norsk Rikskringkasting, NRK, translated by Knut Johansson, and most recently rebroadcast as a 6-episode series on NRK in September and October 2012. The Norwegian version is also available on CD and iTunes. There were readings of the novel in 1971, BBC Radio 4 10x 15 minutes, read by Gabriel Wolfe. A 20-minute extract for schools was first broadcast on BBC Radio 4 on September 21, 1973, adapted and produced by Peter Fawcett. There were readings of the novel in 1980, BBC Radio 4/Woman's Hour 14x 15 minutes, read by David Ashford. An adaptation by Lance Dan in 2 45-minute episodes for the BBC World Service was first broadcast on 8 and September 22, 2001. It was directed by Rosalind Ward, with music by Simon Russell. Episode 2 was originally scheduled for September 15, 2001, but was rescheduled due to the September 11 attacks. Each episode was followed by a 15-minute documentary on the book. There were readings of the novel in 2004, BBC 717x 30 minutes, read by Roger May. Television adaptations. A television serial version was produced by the BBC in 1981, and repeated on BBC 4 in 2006, 2007, 2009, and 2014. It starred John Duttine as Bill Mason. In December 2009, the BBC broadcast a new version of the story, written by and Law and Order writer Patrick Harbinson. It stars Doug Ray Scott as Bill Mason, Joelle Richardson as Joe Playton, Brian Cox as Dennis Mason, Vanessa Redgrave as Durant, Eddie Izzard as Torrance, and Jason Priestley as Coker. An estimated 6.1 million people viewed the first episode. In this version, the Triffids originally evolved in Zaire, and their oil is used as an alternative fuel, averting global warming. The elements of repopulating the Earth and the plague were overlooked in this adaptation. Another difference in the plot was that the Earth was blinded by a solar flare rather than a meteor shower. Sequel. Simon Clarke wrote a sequel, The Night of the Triffids, 2001, set 25 years after Wyndham's book. Big Finish Productions adapted it as an audio play in 2014.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.